The Heat are heading home. They are done. 4-1. It was a magical game 2.
We'll always have game 2.
And then everything else kind of went completely haywire for them. I mean, there's not much to say here. The Heat were without their 2, I don't even think it's arguable, best creators in Jimmy Butler and Terry Rozier. We'll always have Tyler Hero game 2, but he did not seem to bottle up whatever playmaking, patience, and floor quarterbacking that he discovered for the first time fully in his career. That did not travel back down to South Beach or back up to Boston. So it's just, I know from Heat fans in my life with my ladies' South Florida connections, but also like seeing our friends of the pod, like Rohan Nadkarni, talking about it on Twitter. This was kind of like just a tumultuous season from the beginning for the Heat, where, the Dame thing hung over the entire offseason, and then this was just kind of like a run it back of, can we just make the 8 seed and get to the finals again? And it never really felt exactly like that. 8th in the East, 46-36 record, 17th in net rating, 21st in offense, which that was always kind of the issue, right? Like, and I think that really bore itself out here in the postseason, especially with the greater physicality, let's say, the defenses are allowed to use out there right now.
Yeah, they are not. This team as constructed cannot score enough points unless they go on a 3-point heater. And that's what led to their finals run last season, was everybody on the roster starting to make 40% of their threes. The one game where they set a franchise record for 3-point makes is the one they won. Even with that one explosive performance, they netted out to barely a point per possession in this series. And obviously a lot of credit for that does go to Boston with it was an elite defense all year, the length they have on the perimeter, the challenges that they can pose for an opposing offense, and the fact that without Jimmy, without Terry Rozier, without consistent shot making elsewhere, Jaime Jaquez was out for the final game of that series with a hip pointer or hip injury rather.
I think final 2, right?
Final, yeah, it might have been final 2. And
to your point, he was handling a ton of the actual quote unquote point guard reps in that game 2 win.
Yeah. So an important person for bringing the ball up and relieving the pressure and making decisions. And in the absence of any of that shot creation, decision making, et cetera, it's basically, can Bam Adebayo make enough mid-elbow jumpers, mid-foul line jumpers to keep you in the game? And you're not going to be able to. The one shout out for Boston is Derek White was the best player in the series. Made 21 threes in the series. 16 assists to 6 turnovers, 58% from the floor. It would just, every time the ball swung to him, something good happened. Every time he was involved in the action, something good happened with his customary good defense. So that obviously a team that has basically been built around having 6 starters, quote unquote, this season. They slide in Al Horford for Kristaps Porzingis, don't miss a beat, and remains to be seen. I think Chris Haynes reported last night, the expectation is it's likely that Porzingis would miss all of round 2, and they would hope to get him back for the Eastern Conference Finals should they survive past round 2. The performance you saw last night gives you some hope there. As far as Miami, though, some of the questions that we had heading into last offseason that were a big driver in the Damian Lillard conversation persist, right? That was not a good enough half-court offense. It was not good enough at shot creation. Miami, as you mentioned, the 21st in offensive rating, even with having Terry Rozier there, who I think played pretty well for them when he wasn't injured. This team finished bottom 10 in the league in points scored per possession, effective field goal percentage, frequency of shots at the rim, accuracy, shooting at the rim, and maybe most damning because they constantly play clutch games, 27th in offense in crunch time. Score was within 5 points in the last 5 minutes. They do not generate easy enough baskets, even with Jimmy Butler on the floor. They need more pathways to creating that. And I think the big question, the huge one hanging over this offseason now, is how do you get to that? And I think the central figure in that discussion, because we're talking about a capped out team essentially with most of those guys under contract, to me that is Tyler Hero. because there's now a large enough sample size going over several years that when you've actually got your main guys on the floor, you're just not good enough offensively. Looked this up on play-by-play stats this morning. Since 2020, nearly 3,000 minutes of Jimmy, Bam, and Tyler Hero together. They're only plus 3.9 points per 100, and their offense is below league average. Like, if that's the base you're building off of, what are you building? And if that's the question you've got, like, you're not trading Bam because he is the like standard bearer for the culture. The Jimmy question is a big one. We'll talk about that. But Hero, to me, it's like, I think the league told you last summer, we don't view that guy as a star level piece, like a future all-star to build a big deal around. So then what can you do with him? I think that's going to be one of the more interesting questions in the league this summer.
Yeah, his value got thrust into the forefront of the NBA trade landscape when I don't know where it fully originated from, but I remember it being June 30th. And being in the backyard of my friend's house in Atlanta, where I was posted up for the start of free agency, and Dame requests the trade publicly, formally. It happens, and it was almost instantly that the word was that Portland had no interest, and that if there was going to be a Dame and Lillard trade, there was going to be a 3-team trade, being that Tyler Hero was going to have to be sent to a different party. And that word was pretty well known around the league. And there was a couple of teams that had come up at the time. Chicago was one. Brooklyn was one of teams that were interested, and don't 100% know all of the specifics. But the Brooklyn one was part attached to, could they get off of Ben Simmons' contract in that deal? So I don't know exactly how much the Nets were like pining for Tyler Hero in that scenario. Chicago, I think it was a little bit attached to getting off of Zach LaVine's contract. So that's just to say, I can't necessarily tell you a team right now that comes immediately top of mind that's going to be pounding the table to acquire him and that contract. But Miami's got a ton of other situations to explored, because that is like a big swing piece for sure. But that's kind of like, what are the Warriors gonna do about Andrew Wiggins, like equivalent for Miami? Like, Miami needs to figure out what Jimmy Butler's extension talks are going to net. And that's the same thing in New Orleans with Brandon Ingram. Like, those types of conversations, same thing with Donovan Mitchell with his extension in Cleveland. Like, you don't have to re-sign this guy right now. You don't have to come up with an extension number right now. But what truths come out across that table, or whatever the conversation actually includes, that is going to set the course for all of this, because Jimmy turns 35 in September. And who's to say what is going to come if you give him another 4-year, approaching $200 million contract, when the injuries have already started to pile up. And that is the biggest, no matter what, question that the Heat have to address. We could talk about Haywood Highsmith and Caleb Martin and Kevin Love having player options, but the Jimmy thing is 100% going to be what governs and rules the day of every other decision tree that comes down from the main stump, or whatever the analogy is, for what Jimmy Butler's long-term future is going to be with the Heat.
Is Pat Riley the stump? All the decisions flow from the stump, right? I don't know.
I guess so.
But I instantly feel concerned for having said that. I'm like worried it's going to be a knock on the door. So some guys sped here from Schenectady. I think that it's Jimmy. Yeah, I mean, they're going to be 35, has not played 65 games since the year he split between Minnesota and Philly. So has not played, I think 64 last season was the most he's played as a member of the Heat. Obviously, pandemic shortened seasons are a part of that. But also, obviously, like the avatar of the culture, like the sort of most significant piece to the team, the one that elevates their ceiling, elevates their floor. It's a fascinating question, because you are not going to just sort of, if you don't extend him, then you would like Jimmy. I don't know that Jimmy's going to be particularly happy to not be extended. And we've seen an unhappy Jimmy create some interesting circumstances at different organizations in the past. And also, what's your roadmap moving out from there? If you say we don't feel comfortable building the next several years of our roster around Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, then out of what are you building it? I think that it ties back into the hero question, because the guy I was thinking about in relation to, like, the league doesn't think that's a star for a star trade. So then what do you do? Not saying that they are the same guy, not saying that they function the same way. RJ Barrett wasn't going to be enough to get the Donovan Mitchell deal done, right? He wasn't going to be like the main piece of that. RJ Barrett winds up being the main matching salary in the deal that brings back OG Anunoby, a lower order player, but an important player for a Knicks team that made the playoffs. But he was not the most important part of that deal, right? That was from Toronto's perspective, Emmanuel Quickley, as like, this guy could be our starting point guard, someone that we think has all-star upside. So then for Miami, like, again, not saying that these are one-to-one situations, but if you don't know exactly what you want to build around, how do you then attach like a Nikola Jovic or a Jaime Jaquez as the sweetener in a hero deal? If you don't believe that Hero's the guy to build around, how do you move off of that to get something worth building back while also giving up? Like, there's a lot of moving parts here. And I don't know that I see the immediate, like, push button, we are now a 55-win team again move. Of course, I'm not, Pat Riley and that front office, the very smart people who operate and have operated and kept that team consistently competitive for, titles and deep playoff runs for years. I have to imagine that they've got a lot more tricks up their sleeve than I'd see coming. But I think that they're coming. Tim Reynolds at the Associated Press, who covers the Heat closely down there, tweeted this last night. It was a Riley quote from the beginning of the season. Quote, if you build a team around one or two players, three players, and you don't win the championship, then you might have to start thinking, okay, this is not going to work. It's not going to happen. And the history of Pat Riley suggests that when he thinks that, things change in pretty dramatic ways. So I know that the general thing is, like, you look at the financial structure, the assets available for move, the trade, draft picks, et cetera, and you think maybe there's not a whole lot of avenues for the Heat to get better. I think they're still going to make an awful lot of effort to get there, because I think that they now have enough evidence to look at it and say, like, we caught lightning in a bottle a couple times, but we can't guarantee the storm's going to keep raining down.
The Heat are also a team that is going to be hurtling against the second apron, which is going to impact a ton of teams' decision-making this summer, which we will get into a little bit in further detail when we vibe check the Phoenix Suns after we pay some bills and take this break.